12 of those women, as you said, are self-made. So I'm interested in what the breakdown is between self-made and those who inherited their wealth, generational wealth. What does that look like?
Yeah, so the list is mostly a list of self-made billionaires. 70% of the Forbes 400 made their fortune. And not to say that they didn't get help along the way, as many of them would be the first to tell you, and as some of them would never tell you. But you're categorized as self-made if you created the company that made you wealthy rather than inheriting it. And so 70% of the list did that. But we score all the billionaires on sort of how self-made, because there are so many degrees of that. And so you have, the vast majority of the self-made billionaires on the 400 grew up either middle class or upper middle class. There aren't a ton of examples of billionaires who sort of did the complete rags to riches. But there are plenty. There are billionaires who used to be homeless, and billionaires who survived the Holocaust, and all sorts of stuff to amass great wealth and become these great success stories. But there's also plenty of heirs on the list too. 30% of the list, inherited their fortune in one way or another, and some of those are doing very little with it, and others inherited small or medium companies and have grown them into really big companies, but got a serious leg up along the way. So it really spans the gamut to make the 400. People come from all walks of life.
And amassing this amount of wealth must take some time at least to get some billions under your belt. What's the age range of this list?
Yeah, so the average age is 70. So it's certainly a list of largely older people. It's a compound interest. It takes a long time to sort of for things to snowball and for people to sort of build companies that are bigger and big enough and successful enough to make them billionaires. But there are plenty of young members of the list too. There are 11 who are 42 or younger. I think there are 4 who are under the age of 40. So it's certainly possible to get rich really young. But it's by and large a list of people who made their money maybe later in life because it takes time. And I guess the other component of it is, a lot of these people get on this list and they tend to stay on this list. When you have wealth like this, you can't spend it all. It'd be very difficult to spend it all in your lifetime. And so, so some of these people might have been on since 1982. And so, they might be 80 or 90 now, but they might have been 40 when, they first became billionaires or something like that. So between it taking a long time to become rich and it being pretty hard to sort of lose a lot of money when you have a lot of money, you end up with definitely a lot of older people on a list like this.
You saying you can't spend it all, that had my wheels turning a bit here. And I have a question for you. We obviously know that this is an extremely wealthy group, but is it an especially charitable one?
Yeah. Well, it's a list in some ways of the great philanthropists in America. These are people whose names are on countless buildings on college campuses across the nation, wings of some of the most prestigious art museums in the world. These are people who are heralded as enormous philanthropists, and a lot of them are. But they're not as generous as you might think. We score everybody. We try to count up all of their known lifetime giving, whatever we can find, and the vast, vast majority of these billionaires have given away far less than 20% of their net worth, and most of the time less than 5% of their net worth. And of course, that can be 5% of a big number, and so it might be hundreds of millions of dollars. But these are people who have billions and billions of dollars still to give. So yeah, not necessarily the most charitable bunch, but there are 10 billionaires who've given away at least 20% of their wealth, and one who's given away more than half of their current wealth, which is George Soros. So there are people who give a lot, and tons of these other billionaires will give a lot when they die, in their will. But so far, maybe not as much charitable giving as you might think. When you start to realize, these big numbers that you see for how much money they've donated are actually sort of pale in comparison to how much money they still have.
I know that you said a trend of this year's list is the rich are getting richer, and the list is hot off the press. But what's on your radar going into 2024 for the Forbes 400 then?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's a super dynamic list, and so you're always looking for new trends. I think that we'll continue to see AI companies pop up, and it will be interesting to see if any of them sort of produce billionaires who are wealthy enough to make this list. You have sports teams that are only seeming to grow in value. We have several sports billionaires who are not at the level of the 400 yet, but totally might be. And then, you're just always sort of looking to see what industry is going to, produce a great billionaire fortune next. And so it's easy to see some of those trends sometimes coming from a long way away. And sometimes it's totally unexpected. A few years ago, we were talking about NFT billionaires, and that stuff sort of came out of nowhere. It was pretty quick, and we don't have any on the list anymore. But it would have been hard to predict crypto billionaires a few years before we had them. And it would have been hard to predict NFT billionaires. So you never know, I guess, who's going to be the next member of the 400, and sort of what industry is going to produce the next generation of great wealth in America.
Chase, once again, congrats on the list being published. I know it's a tremendous undertaking, and thank you so much for your reporting.
Yeah, thanks for having me.